Jack had always felt more at home beneath the waves than on land. The ocean was his sanctuary, a place where the noise of the world faded into the rhythmic hum of water and the quiet creak of his diving equipment. He lived in a small coastal town in Florida, where he ran a modest business offering guided dives for tourists. But Jack wasn't just any diver. Over the years, he had earned a reputation as someone who could handle the toughest underwater challenges, salvaging sunken boats, repairing offshore rigs, or exploring uncharted depths. His calm demeanor and sharp instincts made him the go-to guy for jobs that others deemed too risky. One evening, as Jack sat on the porch of his weathered beach house, sipping coffee and watching the sun dip below the horizon, his phone buzzed. It was a call from someone named Dr. Emily Dawson. Jack didn't recognize the name, but her voice was urgent, almost desperate. She introduced herself as a marine biologist leading a research expedition near the Bermuda Triangle. Her team, she explained, had detected something unusual on their sonar, a massive object moving erratically on the ocean floor, about 3,000 feet below sea level. At first they thought it might be a whale, or some other large marine creature, but the readings were inconsistent and there were signs of distress. Whatever it was, it seemed to be trapped or injured. Emily's request was straightforward. She needed Jack to dive down and investigate. Normally, Jack would have hesitated at the mention of the Bermuda Triangle. The area was infamous for its strange disappearances and unexplained phenomena, and even seasoned divers avoided it when possible. But something in Emily's tone caught his attention. She sounded genuinely concerned, not just for her research but for whatever was down there. And then there was the challenge itself. Jack had spent years exploring the ocean, but he'd never encountered anything like what Emily described. His curiosity got the better of him, and after a brief pause he agreed to help. The next morning, Jack packed his gear and drove to the marina where Emily and her team were waiting. Their research vessel, a sturdy but aging ship called the Marine Explorer, bobbed gently in the water. Emily greeted him warmly, her blonde hair tied back in a practical ponytail. She looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes. But there was an intensity about her that suggested she hadn't slept much since making the discovery. Beside her stood Ryan, a young assistant with a camera slung over his shoulder. He seemed eager but nervous, glancing at Jack with a mix of admiration and apprehension. As they set sail, Emily filled Jack in on the details. The mysterious object had been detected 2 days earlier during a routine scan of the seafloor. At first they thought it might be a geological formation or debris from a shipwreck, but then the sonar picked up movement, slow and labored as if whatever it was struggling against something. "It's big," Emily said, showing Jack a grainy image on her laptop. "Bigger than anything we've seen before, and it's not behaving like a natural phenomenon." Jack studied the image carefully. It was hard to make out much detail, but the shape was definitely irregular, with long, sweeping curves that didn't match any known marine species. "Could it be a submarine?" he asked, though he doubted it. Submarines didn't usually get stuck on the ocean floor. "We don't think so," Emily replied. "There's no record of any vessels operating in this area recently. Plus, the readings suggest organic material. It's alive, or at least part of it is." The conversation shifted to logistics. Jack would use a small submersible to reach the depth safely, while Emily and Ryan monitored his progress from the surface. They also equipped him with a high-powered flashlight and a cutting tool, just in case he needed to free whatever was trapped. As they prepared for the dive, Emily couldn't hide her anxiety. "Be careful down there," she said. "We've heard stories about strange currents and, well, things people can't explain. Just stay alert." Jack nodded, though he wasn't particularly worried. He trusted his experience and instincts. Still, the mention of things people can't explain lingered in the back of his mind. The Bermuda Triangle had always been a magnet for myths and legends, and while Jack preferred facts over fiction, he knew better than to dismiss the unknown entirely. By mid-afternoon, they reached the coordinates. The sky was overcast, and the water looked darker than usual, as if the ocean itself was holding its breath. Jack climbed into the submersible, a compact but reliable vessel designed for deep-sea exploration. Inside, The air smelled faintly of metal and oil, and the controls gleamed under the dim light. As the hatch closed and the submersible descended, Jack felt a familiar thrill, the kind that came with venturing into the unknown. At first, the descent was uneventful. Schools of fish darted past the windows, and the occasional shadow of a larger creature drifted by. But as they went deeper, the water grew colder and darker, until the only illumination came from the submersible's headlights. The silence was profound, broken only by the soft hum of the engines and the occasional crackle of static from the communication system. After what felt like hours, they finally reached the bottom. The seabed stretched out endlessly, a desolate landscape of sand and rock illuminated by the submersible's lights. Jack scanned the area, searching for any sign of movement. Then suddenly, something caught his eye, a glint of silver, partially obscured by a tangle of cables and debris. As the submersible moved closer, the shape became clearer. It was enormous, far bigger than anything Jack had ever seen. Its body shimmered faintly, covered in what looked like scales, and its long, sinuous form coiled awkwardly among the wreckage. For a moment Jack froze. He had expected something strange, but this was beyond anything he could have imagined. The creature looked like a dragon, like something out of a fairy tale. Its eyes, glowing faintly in the darkness, locked onto the submersible, with an expression that was both weary and wary. Jack's heart raced. Was it alive? Could it be dangerous? He glanced at the monitor displaying Emily and Ryan's faces. They were staring wide-eyed at the footage being transmitted from the submersible. What is that? Ryan stammered, his voice trembling. I don't know, Emily whispered, her face pale, but we need to help it. Jack took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus. Whatever this creature was, it was clearly in trouble. Thick cables wrapped around its body, pinning it to the seabed. If it had been struggling for days, it must be exhausted. Without hesitation, Jack grabbed the cutting tool and prepared to exit the submersible. This was going to be risky, unlike anything he'd done before, but he couldn't turn away. Not now. As he opened the hatch and stepped out into the icy water, Jack felt a surge of determination. The dragon-like creature watched him cautiously, its glowing eyes following his every move. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, with steady hands, Jack began working to free the creature, unaware of the extraordinary journey that lay ahead. The cold water enveloped Jack as he stepped out of the submersible, his movements slow and deliberate to conserve energy in the heavy diving suit. The dragon-like creature loomed before him, its massive form casting a shadow over the ocean floor despite the dim light. Its scales shimmered faintly, reflecting the glow of his flashlight like tiny mirrors scattered across its body. Up close, the creature was even more awe-inspiring and intimidating than it had appeared through the submersible's window. It was easily longer than a school bus, with sinuous limbs that seemed both powerful and delicate. Its eyes, glowing softly in hues of green and gold, followed Jack's every move. Jack tried to stay calm, focusing on the task at hand. He reminded himself that this wasn't so different from other rescue missions he'd done in the past, except, of course, those missions usually involved freeing trapped dolphins or untangling fishing nets from coral reefs, not mythical-looking dragons. Still, fear wouldn't help anyone. Taking a deep breath, he swam closer to the tangled mess of cables wrapped around the creature's midsection. They were thick and rusted, likely remnants of old shipwrecks or industrial debris that had settled on the seabed over decades. Whoever, or whatever, this being was, it hadn't been able to break free on its own. Emily's voice crackled in his earpiece. "How's it looking down there?" she asked, her tone laced with concern. "It's bad," Jack replied, his voice steady despite the surreal situation. "The cables are really tight. I'll need some time to cut through them." "Take your time," Emily said quickly. "We're monitoring everything from up here, just be careful." Jack nodded, though he knew she couldn't see him. Carefully, he positioned himself near the first cable, gripping the cutting tool firmly. The device was designed for underwater use, but it still required precision. One wrong move could damage the creature, or worse, startle it into lashing out. For now, the dragon remained eerily still, its glowing eyes fixed on Jack. He couldn't tell if it understood what he was doing, or if it simply didn't have the strength to resist anymore. As he began slicing through the first cable, Jack noticed something strange etched onto the creature's side. At first glance, they looked like scars, long, jagged lines crisscrossing its otherwise smooth scales. But as he leaned closer, he realized they weren't random marks. They formed patterns, intricate symbols that seemed almost too deliberate to be natural. Some of them glowed faintly, pulsing in rhythm with the creature's slow, labored breathing. Jack paused for a moment, staring at the markings. What did they mean? Were they part of its biology, or had someone or something put them there? Jack? Emily's voice broke through his thoughts. Is everything okay? Yeah, he muttered, shaking off his distraction. Just hold on a second. He returned to the task, carefully working the cutting tool along the length of the cable. Each slice sent a small cloud of rust particles swirling into the water, momentarily obscuring his vision. The process was painstakingly slow, but Jack didn't dare rush. Finally, after several tense minutes, the first cable snapped free, floating upward in the current. The dragon shifted slightly, letting out a low rumble that vibrated through the water. Jack froze, unsure whether the sound was one of pain or relief. When the creature didn't react further, he moved on to the next cable. Time blurred as Jack worked. The pressure at this depth was immense, pressing against his body like an invisible weight. His muscles ached and his breathing grew heavier, each inhale drawing precious oxygen from his tank. But he pushed through the discomfort, driven by a mix of determination and curiosity. Slowly but surely, the cables began to loosen, giving the creature more room to move. By the time he reached the final cable, Jack's arms felt like lead, and sweat dripped down his face inside the helmet. Just as he prepared to make the last cut, the dragon suddenly stirred. Its tail flicked weakly, sending a surge of water rushing past Jack and nearly knocking him off balance. Startled, Jack steadied himself against a nearby rock, his heart pounding. Had he angered it? Was it trying to escape? But then he saw the creature's eyes again, those glowing, otherworldly orbs, and something about their expression calmed him. It wasn't aggression he saw. It was exhaustion, desperation, maybe even gratitude. With renewed focus, Jack finished cutting the last cable. As it snapped free, the dragon let out another low rumble, this one softer and more melodic. For a moment, it simply floated there, suspended in the water as if testing its newfound freedom. Then slowly it began to rise, its massive body undulating gracefully despite its weakened state. Jack watched in awe as it drifted upward, its glowing eyes locking onto his one last time, before disappearing into the darkness above. Back inside, the submersible, Jack exhaled deeply, his body sagging with exhaustion. His hands trembled as he removed his gloves, and his mind raced with questions. What had he just encountered? Was it real, or had the crushing pressure of the deep sea played tricks on his mind? He glanced at the monitor showing Emily and Ryan's faces. Their expressions mirrored his own disbelief. That was incredible, Ryan stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. I've never seen anything like it. Emily nodded, her eyes wide with wonder. Do you think it's some kind of undiscovered species or something else entirely? I don't know, Jack admitted, leaning back in his seat. But those symbols on its side, they weren't natural. They looked artificial, almost like writing. The trio sat in silence for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Whatever the creature was, it clearly wasn't just an ordinary marine animal. And yet it had acted with surprising restraint, allowing Jack to approach and help without resistance. Could it have been intelligent? If so, why had it ended up trapped on the ocean floor? As the submersible began its ascent, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that the encounter wasn't over. Something about the dragon's gaze had stayed with him, lingering in his mind like an unanswered question. It wasn't fear he felt. It was intrigue, mixed with a sense of responsibility. Whatever that creature was, it had trusted him enough to let him help. That thought weighed heavily on Jack as the lights of the Marine Explorer came into view above. When they surfaced, the team wasted no time reviewing the footage captured during the dive. Ryan hooked up his camera to a laptop, playing back the video frame by frame. The images were grainy but undeniable. A massive, serpentine creature with glowing eyes and mysterious symbols etched into its skin. Emily studied the footage intently, her brow furrowed in concentration. "This changes everything," she murmured. "If word gets out about this, people will want answers." Jack nodded, though he wasn't sure how much he wanted to share. Part of him felt protective of the creature, as if revealing its existence might put it in danger. But secrets had a way of surfacing, especially when cameras were involved. For now, all he could do was wait and see what the next step would be. That night, as Jack lay in his bunk aboard the Marine Explorer, sleep eluded him. The image of the dragon kept replaying in his mind, its glowing eyes haunting him like a dream he couldn't quite grasp. He wondered where it had gone, whether it was safe, and what it meant to the world, if anything. Somewhere deep within him, a quiet voice whispered that this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. The next morning, the atmosphere aboard the Marine Explorer was tense but charged with excitement. Jack, Emily, and Ryan gathered around a cluttered table in the ship's cramped research lab, surrounded by laptops, notebooks, and scattered papers. The footage from the dive played on a loop on one of the screens, capturing every detail of the dragon-like creature, from its shimmering scales to the intricate symbols etched into its side. Each time the video replayed, it felt like uncovering a new layer of mystery. Emily leaned forward, her fingers tracing the glowing patterns on the frozen frame of the screen. "These symbols," she said slowly, her voice tinged with awe. "They aren't random. They look deliberate, like writing or some kind of code." Jack nodded, recalling how vividly those markings had stood out even in the dim underwater light. "Do you think they're part of its biology? Or maybe something humans did to it?" "It's hard to say," Emily admitted, shaking her head. "But I've seen similar designs before, in ancient myths and legends. Dragons have always been depicted as guardians of hidden knowledge or treasures. Maybe this creature is connected to that somehow." Ryan, who had been quietly observing the discussion, suddenly spoke up. "You mean, like it's protecting something down there?" "Exactly," Emily replied, her eyes lighting up. "Think about it. Why else would it be so deep, tangled in cables near the ocean floor? It could be guarding something important. Something we don't understand yet." Jack frowned, trying to process the idea. A mythical dragon guarding treasure sounded like the plot of a fantasy novel, not real life. But after what he'd witnessed, he couldn't dismiss the possibility entirely. "If that's true," he said cautiously, "then freeing it might not have been the end of the story. What if it goes back to whatever it was protecting?" Emily's expression turned serious. "That's why we need to go back. If this creature is tied to something significant, whether it's biological, geological, or even extraterrestrial, we can't just walk away. We owe it to ourselves and to science to find out more." Jack hesitated. Returning to the depths meant facing the unknown again, and the risks were undeniable. The last dive had pushed him to his limits, both physically and mentally. But at the same time, he couldn't ignore the pull of curiosity, or the nagging sense that the dragon had trusted him for a reason. "All right," he said finally. "Let's do it. But this time, we need a plan. No rushing in blind." The team spent the rest of the day preparing for their second descent. They reviewed the sonar data, mapping out the exact location where the dragon had been trapped. Emily also suggested bringing additional equipment, a high-resolution camera capable of capturing clearer images of the symbols, as well as a small drone designed for underwater exploration. "We'll need all the evidence we can get," she explained. "If we're going to prove this isn't just some hallucination caused by the pressure, we'll need solid proof." As dusk fell, the Marine Explorer returned to the coordinates. The water was calmer this time, but the air carried an eerie stillness as though the ocean itself was holding its breath. Jack suited up once again, checking his gear meticulously. His hands moved automatically, tightening straps and testing valves, but his mind was elsewhere. He kept thinking about the dragon's glowing eyes and the way it had looked at him, not as prey or predator but as an equal. It was a memory that unsettled him in ways he couldn't fully explain. When the submersible began its descent, Jack felt a mix of anticipation and dread. The journey downward seemed longer this time, the darkness pressing in from all sides. As they approached the seabed, the headlights revealed a scene that made Jack's stomach churn. The area where the dragon had been trapped was now littered, with fresh disturbances, scattered rocks, twisted metal fragments, and deep gouges in the sand, as if something massive had thrashed violently before leaving. "What happened here?" Ryan asked, his voice trembling over the comms. "I don't know," Jack replied, scanning the surroundings. "But it doesn't look good." They continued searching, moving cautiously through the debris field. Then, just as Jack was beginning to lose hope, the submersible's lights caught a glimmer in the distance. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakably unnatural. As they drew closer, the source became clear. Clusters of glowing crystals embedded in the rock formations along the ocean floor. The light they emitted was soft yet intense, casting an ethereal glow across the surrounding area. "Those crystals," Emily breathed, her voice filled with wonder. "They're incredible." Jack stared at them, mesmerized. The crystals pulsed gently, as if alive, their colors shifting between shades of blue, green, and gold. They reminded him of the dragon's glowing eyes and the symbols on its body. Could there be a connection? Before anyone could speculate further, movement in the periphery caught Jack's attention. At first, it was subtle, a shadow flickering at the edge of the light. Then slowly the dragon emerged from the darkness, its massive form gliding silently toward the submersible. This time, however, it wasn't alone. Around it swirled smaller creatures, translucent and jellyfish-like, their bodies illuminated by the crystal's glow. They seemed to orbit the dragon protectively, forming a living shield. "It's back," Ryan whispered, his voice barely audible. Jack nodded, his heart racing. The dragon looked weaker than before, its movements sluggish and unsteady. Its scales, once vibrant and shimmering, now appeared dull and cracked in places. Whatever energy it had regained after being freed seemed to have drained away, leaving it visibly frail. Despite its weakened state, it exuded an aura of authority, as if commanding respect simply by existing. Without hesitation, Jack prepared to exit the submersible again. "I'm going out," he announced, his tone firm despite the knot of fear tightening in his chest. "It needs help." "Are you sure?" Emily asked, concern evident in her voice. "What if it's too dangerous?" "We don't have a choice," Jack replied. "If we leave it like this, it might not survive." Suiting up once more, Jack stepped into the icy water, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The dragon watched him approach, its glowing eyes locking onto his with an intensity that sent shivers down his spine. For a moment he wondered if it remembered him, if it understood that he had come to help. Then, as if answering his unspoken question, the dragon let out a low rumble, the sound reverberating through the water like a distant echo. Swimming closer, Jack noticed something alarming. The dragon's injuries were worse than he'd realized. Deep gashes marred its side, exposing raw flesh beneath the damaged scales. Some of the wounds appeared fresh, while others looked older, crusted with what might have been dried blood. Jack's stomach churned at the sight. Whatever battle the dragon had fought, it had paid a heavy price. Using hand signals, Jack communicated his intentions to the creature, hoping it would understand. When it didn't react aggressively, he carefully positioned himself near its injured side. Working methodically, he used the tools at his disposal to clean the wounds as best he could, applying a special gel designed to promote healing in marine animals. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was all he could do under the circumstances. As he worked, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that the dragon was communicating with him, not through words, but through emotions. He sensed a deep sadness, a weariness that went beyond physical pain. It was as if the creature carried the weight of centuries on its shoulders, burdened by a purpose it could no longer fulfill. Finally, after what felt like hours, Jack finished tending to the worst of the injuries. Exhausted, he floated back a few feet, watching as the dragon took a tentative breath, or at least what passed for breathing in such a being. Its glowing eyes softened, and for a brief moment, Jack thought he saw gratitude in its gaze. Then, without warning, the dragon began to rise, its massive body drifting upward with surprising grace. The smaller creatures followed, their lights fading into the darkness as they ascended. Jack watched until the last trace of their glow disappeared, leaving him alone in the silent void. Back inside the submersible, Jack relayed what he'd seen to Emily and Ryan. "It's hurt badly," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "Whatever it's guarding, it's costing it everything." Emily nodded, her expression grim. "We need to figure out what these crystals are. If they're connected to the dragon, they might hold the key to understanding its purpose." Deep, the submersible began its ascent. Jack couldn't stop thinking about the dragon's plight. It had trusted him twice now, allowing him to intervene when most creatures would have fled or attacked. That trust weighed heavily on him, a responsibility he wasn't sure he was ready to bear. But one thing was certain: this wasn't over. The dragon's story and the secrets of the glowing crystals were far from resolved, and Jack knew deep down that he would have to face them again. By the time the marine explorer returned to shore, Jack felt like he'd been carrying a secret too big for one person to handle. The images of the dragon and the glowing crystals haunted him, replaying in his mind like fragments of a dream he couldn't shake. He hadn't slept much since the dive, and when he did, his dreams were filled with shimmering scales, pulsing lights, and the dragon's glowing eyes watching him from the depths. It wasn't fear that kept him awake. It was curiosity, mixed with a growing sense of responsibility. Emily and Ryan were no less affected. Back at the research lab they'd set up on land, the team pored over every piece of data they'd collected. Sonar readings, video footage, photographs of the crystals, and even sketches of the symbols etched into the dragon's side. Emily spent hours cross-referencing the symbols with ancient texts and mythologies, her desk cluttered with books and papers. "These markings," she said one evening, pointing to a grainy image on her laptop, "they're not just decorative. They're part of something bigger, something ancient." Jack leaned over her shoulder, squinting at the screen. The symbols looked familiar now, though he couldn't place why. "You think they're connected to the crystals?" "I do," Emily replied, her voice tinged with excitement. "In some myths, dragons were said to guard treasures, not gold or jewels, but knowledge. These crystals could be part of that. Maybe they're not just rocks. Maybe they're alive in a way." Ryan, who had been quietly organizing their equipment, chimed in. "Alive? Like bioluminescent algae or something?" "Not exactly," Emily said, shaking her head. "Think bigger. What if these crystals are conduits for energy? Energy that the dragon uses to survive or to protect whatever it's guarding. That would explain why it's so tied to this area." Jack frowned, trying to wrap his head around the idea. If Emily was right, then the dragon wasn't just a creature. It was a guardian, tasked with protecting something far more significant than anyone had imagined. But what? And why? The next few days passed in a blur of research and speculation. Emily reached out to colleagues in marine biology, geology, and even archaeology, hoping someone might recognize the symbols or the crystals. Meanwhile, Ryan uploaded the footage to a secure server, editing it carefully to remove any identifying details about their location. "We can't risk someone finding out about this and rushing down there before we understand what's going on," he explained. Jack, for his part, found himself drawn back to the ocean. During the day, he helped Emily and Ryan analyze their findings, but at night he went diving alone, exploring shallow reefs and wrecks near the coast. The water calmed him, grounding him in a way nothing else could. Still, no matter how deep he dove or how long he stayed underwater, he couldn't escape the feeling that the dragon was waiting for him somewhere in the abyss. One evening, as Jack sat on the beach watching the waves roll in, his phone buzzed. It was Emily. "We found something," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "You need to see this." When Jack arrived at the lab, Emily was hunched over her laptop, her face illuminated by the glow of the screen. On it was an image of one of the symbols from the dragon's side, magnified and enhanced. Beside it was a photograph of a carving taken from an ancient stone tablet discovered in Egypt decades earlier. The resemblance was uncanny. This symbol, Emily explained, tapping the screen, appears in multiple cultures across history. It's always associated with protection, balance, or power. Some scholars believe it represents a kind of cosmic force, a connection between worlds. A connection between worlds? Jack echoed, raising an eyebrow. You mean like another dimension? Maybe, Emily admitted. Or maybe something more literal. Think about it. The dragon is, guarding those crystals which seem to emit energy. What if that energy is maintaining some kind of equilibrium for the planet, or even beyond? Jack stared at the screen, his mind racing. If Emily's theory was correct, then the stakes were higher than anyone had realized. The dragon wasn't just a mysterious creature. It was a key player in a system far larger and more complex than human understanding. And if that system were disrupted, we have to go back, Jack said suddenly, his voice firm. If the dragon's injured, it might not be able to keep doing whatever it's supposed to do. We can't just leave it like that. Emily hesitated, her excitement giving way to concern. It's dangerous, Jack. We don't know what we're dealing with down there. Those crystals, they might be unstable. Or worse, they could attract attention from people who don't care about protecting them. I know, Jack replied. But we can't ignore it either. Whatever's happening down there, it's important, too important to walk away from. After a long pause, Emily nodded. All right. But this time we need to be smarter. No rushing in blind. We'll plan everything carefully. Equipment, timing, contingencies. The preparations took several days, during which the team worked tirelessly to refine their strategy. Emily designed a specialized container for collecting samples of the crystals without disturbing them, while Ryan programmed the drone to map the surrounding area in greater detail. Jack, meanwhile, focused on ensuring his diving gear was in top condition, double-checking every valve, seal, and battery. As they loaded the Marine Explorer and set sail once again, the air was thick with anticipation. The journey to the coordinates felt longer this time, each wave beneath the hull carrying the weight of unanswered questions. When they finally arrived, the sky was overcast, and the water looked darker than ever, as if the ocean itself was holding its secrets close. Inside the submersible, Jack tried to steady his breathing as they began their descent. The deeper they went, the colder and quieter it became, until the only sounds were the hum of the engines and the occasional crackle of static from the comms. When they reached the seabed, the scene was eerily unchanged, the glowing crystals still embedded in the rock, casting their soft light across the sand. But there was no sign of the dragon. Where is it? Ryan asked, his voice tense. I don't know, Jack replied, scanning the area, but it has to be here somewhere. Just as he finished speaking, the submersible's lights caught movement in the distance. At first it was faint, a shadow drifting lazily through the water. Then slowly the dragon emerged from the darkness, its massive form gliding silently toward them. This time, however, it didn't stop. Instead, it circled the submersible, its glowing eyes fixed on Jack with an intensity that made his heart race. It's communicating, Emily whispered, her voice filled with awe. Look at its movements, it's trying to tell us something. Jack nodded, feeling a strange mix of fear and clarity. The dragon's gestures were deliberate, almost rhythmic, as if it were leading them somewhere. Following its path, the submersible moved closer to the cluster of crystals, revealing something they hadn't noticed before. A narrow fissure in the rock, partially obscured by debris. Inside the fissure, the glow of the crystals was brighter, almost blinding. What is that? Ryan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know, Emily replied, her eyes wide with wonder, but I think we're about to find out. Without hesitation, Jack prepared to exit the submersible again. This time he carried a small device designed to measure energy levels, as well as the container Emily had prepared for collecting crystal samples. As he stepped into the icy water, the dragon watched him closely, its presence both comforting and unnerving. Slowly, Jack swam toward the fissure, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. Inside, the space opened up into a cavern-like chamber, its walls lined with glowing crystals. The light they emitted was mesmerizing, shifting colors in a pattern that seemed almost alive. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal-like structure, atop which rested a single massive crystal. Unlike the others, this one pulsed with a steady rhythm as if it were breathing. Jack approached cautiously, his heart pounding. As he reached out to touch the crystal, a surge of warmth spread through his body, followed by a flood of images. Vivid, overwhelming flashes of oceans teeming with life, skies filled with stars, and landscapes unlike anything on Earth. For a moment, he thought he heard a voice, not in words but in emotions. Gratitude, warning, urgency. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the vision faded, leaving Jack disoriented and breathless. Behind him, the dragon let out a low rumble, its glowing eyes locking onto his with an expression that was both fierce and protective. Back inside the submersible, Jack relayed what he'd experienced to Emily and Ryan. I think the dragon's guarding this place because it's important, not just for the ocean but for everything. That crystal. It's like a heartbeat, keeping something alive. Emily nodded, her expression grave. If that's true, then we've stumbled onto something far bigger than we ever imagined, something humanity might not be ready for. As the submersible began its ascent, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they'd only scratched the surface of the mystery. The dragon's message, if that's what it was clear. The balance it protected was fragile, and the consequences of disrupting it could be catastrophic. Whatever came next, Jack knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just his story anymore, it belonged to everyone. The return journey to the surface felt longer than usual. The submersible climbed steadily, its lights cutting through the darkness as the pressure around them eased with each passing minute. Inside, Jack sat in silence, his mind racing with the weight of what he'd seen and felt in the cavern below. The glowing crystals, the pulsing central crystal, the dragon's watchful gaze. It all pointed to something far greater than any of them had anticipated. He couldn't shake the sense that they were standing on the edge of a revelation, one that could change everything humanity understood about the world, and perhaps even the universe. Emily and Ryan were equally subdued, their earlier excitement replaced by a quiet intensity. Emily stared at the footage captured during the dive, her fingers hovering over the keyboard as if unsure where to begin analyzing it. Ryan, meanwhile, fiddled with the drone controls, replaying the mapping data they'd gathered from the fissure. This doesn't make sense, he muttered under his breath. The energy readings, they're off the charts. It's like nothing I've ever seen. Jack leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. What do you mean? Ryan hesitated, glancing at Emily before answering. The crystals, they're emitting some kind of energy field, but it's not consistent with anything natural. It's almost artificial, like someone or something designed them. Emily nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. That matches what we've been seeing in the symbols too. They're not random patterns, they're part of a system, a language maybe. And if the dragon is tied to that system, then it's not just guarding the crystals, Jack finished for her. It's maintaining them, keeping whatever they're doing alive. The implications hung heavy in the air. If the dragon was responsible for sustaining the crystals, and by extension, the energy field they emitted, then its survival was crucial. Without it, the balance it protected might collapse with consequences no one could predict. But how could they help? They were just 3 people with limited resources and even less understanding of what they were dealing with. When the Marine Explorer finally docked, the team wasted no time unloading their equipment and setting up a temporary command center in the lab. Emily spread out maps and diagrams across the table, marking key points: the location of the fissure, the depth of the cavern, the energy readings from the crystals. We need to figure out what's happening down there, she said firmly. And fast. If the dragon is injured, it might not be able to keep up its role much longer. Jack nodded, though unease gnawed at him. Every instinct told him they were rushing headlong into something they didn't fully understand. But what choice did they have? Leaving the dragon and the crystals to fend for themselves wasn't an option. Not after what he'd experienced in the cavern. Over the next few days, the team worked tirelessly to piece together a plan. Emily reached out to trusted colleagues, sharing cryptic details about their discovery without revealing too much. One scientist, a geophysicist named Dr. Alan Carter, expressed interest in the energy readings. "If these numbers are accurate," he said during a video call, "you're looking at something beyond our current understanding of physics. This isn't just geological activity. It's something else entirely." Meanwhile, Ryan focused on enhancing the images and videos they'd captured, using software to sharpen the details of the symbols and the crystals. "Look at this," he said one evening, pointing to a magnified image of the central crystal. "See those patterns inside it? They match the symbols on the dragon's side. It's like it's storing information." "Information?" Jack asked, leaning closer. "What kind of information?" "I don't know," Ryan admitted. "But if the dragon is connected to it, maybe it's using the crystal to communicate or to maintain whatever system it's part of." Emily's eyes lit up. "That would explain why it led us to the cavern. Maybe it wanted us to see this, to understand what's at stake." As the pieces began to fall into place, Jack found himself growing more restless. The dragon's presence lingered in his thoughts, its glowing eyes haunting him like a silent plea. He knew they couldn't delay much longer. Whatever was happening in the depths of the ocean, it was urgent. By the end of the week, the team was ready to return to the site. This time they came prepared with additional equipment: a portable scanner designed to analyze the energy field, a reinforced container for safely transporting crystal samples, and a second submersible in case of emergencies. The stakes were higher now, and none of them wanted to take unnecessary risks. The journey back to the coordinates passed in tense silence. When they arrived, the water was calm but eerily still, as if the ocean itself was holding its breath. As Jack descended, in the submersible, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. The seabed looked unchanged, the glowing crystals still embedded in the rock, their light casting an ethereal glow across the sand. But the atmosphere felt heavier, charged with an almost electric tension. When the dragon appeared, it was clear that its condition had worsened. Its movements were slower, its scales duller, and its glowing eyes dimmer than before. It circled the submersible once, then drifted toward the fisher, gesturing with its tail for them to follow. Jack exchanged a glance with Emily and Ryan, who nodded in agreement. Whatever the dragon was trying to show them, they needed to see it. Inside the cavern, the scene was both beautiful and unsettling. The central crystal pulsed with a faint, irregular rhythm, its light flickering as if struggling to stay alive. Around it, smaller crystals had begun to dim, their glow fading into the darkness. Jack's heart sank as he realized what was happening. The system was failing. Without hesitation, Jack exited the submersible, swimming toward the pedestal. Up close, the central crystal seemed fragile, its surface cracked and brittle. He reached out cautiously, placing his hand against it. A surge of warmth spread through his body, followed by another flood of images, this time chaotic and fragmented. He saw oceans drying up, skies darkening, and landscapes crumbling into dust. The message was clear. Without intervention, the balance the dragon protected would collapse. Behind him, the dragon let out a low, mournful rumble, its glowing eyes filled with sorrow. For a moment, Jack thought he understood. The creature wasn't just asking for help, it was begging. Back inside the submersible, Jack relayed what he'd seen to Emily and Ryan. "We have to do something," he said urgently. "If the crystal fails, everything it's connected to will fail too. We can't let that happen." Emily nodded, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "We'll stabilize it the best we can, but we'll need to bring samples back to the surface for analysis. If we can figure out how the crystals work, maybe we can replicate their effects or find a way to support the dragon." With renewed determination, the team set to work. Using the portable scanner, they mapped the energy field surrounding the crystals, recording every detail they could. Jack carefully collected fragments of the smaller crystals, storing them in the reinforced container. Meanwhile, Ryan maneuvered the drone around the cavern, capturing high-resolution images of the central crystal and its intricate patterns. As they worked, the dragon remained nearby, its presence both comforting and unnerving. It seemed to understand what they were doing, watching them with an expression that was almost human in its complexity. When they finally finished, Jack turned to face the creature one last time. "We'll come back," he promised, though he wasn't sure if it could. Hear him. "We'll figure this out." The ascent to the surface was somber, each of them lost in their own thoughts. When they emerged into the sunlight, the weight of their discovery settled over them like a storm cloud. They had uncovered something extraordinary, something that defied explanation, but they also knew they were only scratching the surface. In the days that followed, the team pored over their findings, piecing together theories and hypotheses. Emily reached out to Dr. Carter again, sharing the energy readings and crystal samples for further analysis. Ryan edited the footage, creating a detailed report that documented everything they'd seen. And Jack spent hours staring at the horizon, thinking about the dragon and the responsibility it had entrusted to him. One night, as he stood on the beach watching the waves roll in, Jack made a decision. Whatever happened next, he would dedicate himself to protecting the balance the dragon guarded. It wasn't just his story anymore, it was humanity's, and he intended to make sure the world listened. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Jack, Emily, and Ryan worked tirelessly to analyze the data they'd collected from the cavern, piecing together clues about the glowing crystals and the dragon's role in maintaining the balance of the system. The samples they brought back revealed something extraordinary. The crystals weren't just rocks. They were alive in a way no one had ever seen before. Microscopic structures within them pulsed with energy, emitting frequencies that matched patterns found in nature, ocean currents, weather systems, even the Earth's magnetic field. Dr. Alan Carter confirmed their findings, his voice tinged with awe during a video call. "These crystals are like anchors," he explained. "They stabilize the planet's natural systems. If they fail, it could disrupt everything: climate, ecosystems, even life itself." Emily nodded, her expression grim. "And the dragon is the key to keeping them active. Without it, the whole system collapses." Jack listened silently, his mind racing. The responsibility they carried was immense, almost too much to comprehend. But one thing was clear: they couldn't keep this discovery to themselves. Humanity needed to know what was at stake, and what it could lose if they didn't act. Sharing their findings with the world wasn't easy. The team knew they had to be careful. Revealing the existence of the dragon and the crystals could attract attention from people who might exploit or harm them. After long discussions, they decided to release a carefully edited report, omitting specific details about the location and focusing instead on the broader implications of their discovery. They included images of the glowing crystals, diagrams of the energy fields, and footage of the dragon, but only from a distance, ensuring its identity remained mysterious. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Scientists around the globe clamored for more information, while environmentalists hailed the discovery as proof of the interconnectedness of all life on Earth. Media outlets ran stories speculating about the dragon's origins, with some calling it a guardian of the planet and others dismissing it as a hoax. Amid the chaos, Jack felt a mix of pride and unease. He was glad people were paying attention, but he worried about the consequences of exposing such a fragile secret. As the weeks passed, Jack threw himself into advocacy work. He gave interviews, wrote articles, and spoke at conferences, urging governments and corporations to take action to protect the oceans. His message was simple: the planet's survival depended on humanity's ability to live in harmony with nature. The dragon's plight was a symbol of everything wrong with how humans treated the environment: pollution, overfishing, climate change. If they didn't change their ways, the balance the dragon protected would falter, and the consequences could be catastrophic. Emily and Ryan supported him every step of the way. Emily focused on scientific outreach, collaborating with researchers to study the crystal samples and better understand their properties. Ryan used his skills as a videographer to create documentaries showcasing the beauty and fragility of the underwater world. Together, they formed a powerful team, spreading awareness and inspiring others to join their cause. But despite their efforts, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The dragon's condition had been dire when they last saw it, and he feared it might not survive much longer without help. Late at night, he often found himself staring at the ocean, wondering if the creature was still down there, or if it had already succumbed to its injuries. One evening, as Jack sat on the porch of his beach house, a sudden knock startled him. Opening the door, he found Emily standing there, her face pale and her hands trembling. "We need to go back," she said urgently. "Now." "What happened?" Jack asked, his heart sinking. "It's the energy readings," Emily replied, holding up her laptop. "They're dropping fast. If we don't do something soon, the entire system could collapse." Without hesitation, Jack grabbed his gear, and within hours they were aboard the Marine Explorer, heading back to the coordinates. The journey felt endless, each wave beneath the hull carrying the weight of their fears. When they finally arrived, the water was eerily calm, the surface reflecting the moonlight like glass. Descending into the depths, Jack braced himself for the worst. As they approached the seabed, the scene was devastating. The glowing crystals that had once illuminated the area were dim, their light barely visible in the darkness. The fissure leading to the cavern was partially collapsed, debris blocking the entrance. And the dragon? The dragon lay motionless on the sand, its massive form still but for the faint rise and fall of its chest. Jack's heart ached as he swam toward it, his flashlight casting a weak beam over its battered body. Its scales were dull, its eyes barely glowing. For a moment he thought it was gone, but then it stirred, lifting its head slightly to look at him. The sadness in its gaze broke his heart. "We're here to help," Jack whispered, though he knew it couldn't hear him. Carefully he positioned himself near the dragon, using the tools at his disposal to assess its injuries. The wounds were severe, many of them infected or festering. He applied the healing gel again, working methodically despite the growing sense of despair. This wasn't enough. They needed a miracle. Inside the cavern, the central crystal was nearly dark, its pulse erratic and faint. Emily and Ryan joined Jack, their faces etched with worry. "We have to try," Emily said firmly. "Even if it's just buying time, we have to try." Working together, they set up the portable scanner, feeding energy into the crystal in an attempt to stabilize it. The process was slow and painstaking, each second stretching into eternity. Finally, after what felt like hours, the crystal began to brighten, its rhythm steadying slightly. The smaller crystals around it responded in turn, their glow returning like embers reignited. The dragon seemed to sense the change. With a low rumble, it shifted, its glowing eyes locking onto Jack's. For a moment, he thought he heard a voice, not in words, but in emotions. Gratitude, trust, hope. Then slowly, it rose, its massive form gliding gracefully toward the cavern. As it passed, the crystals pulsed brighter, their light filling the space with warmth and vitality. When the dragon reached the pedestal, it paused, turning to face Jack one last time. Its glowing eyes softened, and for a brief moment, Jack thought he saw understanding in its gaze. Then, with a final rumble, it disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind only silence. Back on the surface, the team sat in stunned silence, processing what they'd witnessed. The dragon had sacrificed everything to protect the balance it guarded, trusting them to carry on its mission. It was a responsibility none of them took lightly. In the months that followed, Jack, Emily, and Ryan redoubled their efforts, using their newfound platform to advocate for ocean conservation and environmental protection. Their story inspired millions, sparking movements and initiatives aimed at preserving the planet's natural systems. Though the dragon was gone, its legacy lived on, in the hearts of those who believed in its message, and in the actions of those determined to honor it. For Jack, the experience changed him forever. He continued diving, exploring the ocean's mysteries with a renewed sense of purpose. But every time he looked into the depths, he couldn't help but wonder if the dragon was still watching, waiting to see if humanity would rise to meet its challenge. And somewhere in the abyss, far beyond the reach of human eyes, the dragon lingered in the shadows, a silent guardian of the balance it had sworn to protect.